Now on to the fourth and final lesson of Module 1, the history of sustainability. In this section of the course, we will take a deep dive into its modern definition and roots. It's essential to acknowledge that the concept of sustainability is not a recent innovation. Its origins are deep-rooted in the practices and philosophies of indigenous cultures, stretching back centuries. This traditional knowledge forms the backbone of what we today recognize as sustainability, a fact that should remain at the forefront as we delve deeper into its modern implications. Let's look at the history of sustainability, from roots to modern business practice. Long before sustainability became a buzzword, many societies lived by principles of balance and renewal. Indigenous knowledge systems across the world emphasized harmony with ecosystems. From rotational farming and water management to stewardship traditions designed to protect resources for future generations. At the heart of these practices was intergenerational equity, the belief that we must care for the earth so our children and their children can thrive. The idea of sustainability also took shape in Europe through forestry management. In 1713, Hans Carl von Carlowitz published Silvicultura Economica, introducing the principle of sustained yield forestry. His message was simple but profound: harvest only as many trees as can grow back. But the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries disrupted these traditions. Rapid urbanization, rising pollution, and relentless resource extraction fueled unprecedented economic growth, but also set the stage for environmental degradation on a massive scale. These tensions between growth and limits would later spark the global sustainability debates of the 20th century. The 1960s and 70s marked the birth of modern environmentalism, a period when science, activism, and politics collided to reshape how societies viewed the natural world. In 1962, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring exposed the dangers of pesticides like DDT, linking ecological damage to public health. Her work ignited public outrage and is often credited with launching the environmental movement. Governments began responding with major regulatory milestones: the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in 1970, the Clean Air Act, 1970, and the Clean Water Act, 1972. On the international stage, the 1972 Stockholm Conference became the first UN conference on the environment. The decade was also shaped by the oil crises of 1973 and 1979, which caused prices to skyrocket and revealed the vulnerability of economies dependent on finite fossil fuels. These shocks catalyzed early research into renewable energy, energy efficiency, and even the first ideas of a circular economy. The notion that resources must be reused and cycled rather than endlessly consumed. This era laid the foundations of modern sustainability, showing that environmental protection was no longer just an activist demand. It was becoming a central political, economic, and social priority. The late 20th century was a pivotal period in redefining the role of business in society. In 1970, economist Milton Friedman famously argued that the business of business is business, insisting that corporations existed solely to maximize shareholder profits. For Friedman, corporate leaders who focused on social causes risked undermining the free market system. But as the 1980s and 1990s unfolded, counter movements gained momentum. Civil society, consumers, and regulators began demanding that corporations take responsibility for their impacts on the environment, labor rights, and human well-being. From oil spills in Nigeria to campaigns against apartheid in South Africa, the Global South context highlighted how sustainability was not only an environmental issue, but also one of justice, equity, and power. In 1991, Archie Carroll introduced the CSR pyramid, a framework that defined corporate responsibility across 4 layers. Economic responsibilities: be profitable and sustainable in business. Legal responsibilities: obey the law and regulations. Ethical responsibilities: do what is right, just, and fair, even beyond compliance. Philanthropic responsibilities: voluntarily contribute to society through giving and community engagement. This model became one of the most widely taught and referenced definitions of CSR, showing that business responsibilities go far beyond profit. At the same time, conversations within the United Nations began laying the groundwork for what would become the UN Global Compact in 2000, the first major initiative bringing business into global sustainability dialogue. The rise of CSR reflected a broader truth. By the 1990s, corporations could no longer ignore their social and environmental footprints. They were being held accountable not only for what they produced, but for how they operated in communities around the world. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development, chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, released the landmark report, Our Common Future. This report gave us the most enduring and widely cited definition of sustainable development, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What made the Brundtland report groundbreaking was its integration of three dimensions that had often been considered separately: social equity, economic development, and environmental protection. It reframed sustainability not as an environmental issue alone, but as a holistic challenge of balancing people, prosperity, and the planet. This definition became the foundation for all later sustainability frameworks, from the three-pillar model to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The 1990s were a turning point in bringing sustainability into both international policy and business strategy. In 1992, the world gathered at the Rio Earth Summit, producing Agenda 21, a blueprint for global sustainable development. One of the most important outcomes was the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It recognized that while all nations share responsibility for protecting the environment, the global north, with its history of industrial emissions, must carry a greater burden, while the global south must be allowed space to develop. 2 years later, in 1994, John Elkington introduced the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. This framework challenged companies to expand their focus beyond financial returns, measuring success by their social and environmental impacts as well. It was a crucial step in reframing business responsibility. In 1997, the Kyoto Protocol became the first legally binding climate treaty, requiring industrialized nations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Though limited in scope, it set an important precedent for future climate negotiations. That same year, another milestone shaped corporate sustainability, the launch of the Global Reporting Initiative. Unlike traditional CSR, which often meant philanthropy or voluntary good deeds, GRI introduced structured guidelines for sustainability reporting. It gave companies a framework to measure, disclose, and compare their social and environmental performance. Together, these developments signaled a shift from sustainability, like as a moral duty, to sustainability as a structured, measurable, and globally negotiated responsibility. The early 2000s marked the beginning of a new phase in the global sustainability journey, one that started weaving sustainability directly into business and finance. In 2000, the United Nations launched the UN Global Compact, introducing 10 principles on human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. It called on companies to embed these values into their strategies and operations, making sustainability part of corporate responsibility on a global scale. At the same time, the Millennium Development Goals, running from 2000 to 2015, shaped the Global Development Agenda, focused on poverty reduction, health, and education. They highlighted the link between social progress and economic development and set the stage for broader sustainability thinking. Then in 2004, the term ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance, was introduced in the UN Principles for Responsible Investment UNPRI report. This was a game changer. It gave investors a framework to assess companies not only on financial performance, but also on their environmental impact, social responsibility, and governance practices. 2 years later, in 2006, the UNPRI was officially launched, inviting investors worldwide to integrate ESG into their portfolios. For the first time, sustainability was not just a corporate or NGO issue. It had entered mainstream investment decision-making. The 2008 financial crisis further accelerated this shift. The crisis revealed what happens when governance and ethics are ignored, making ESG a powerful tool for risk management and resilience. It became clear that ignoring environmental, social, and governance risks wasn't just irresponsible, it was financially dangerous. By the end of the 2010s, ESG had evolved from a promising idea into a core framework for aligning finance, business strategy, and sustainability. The year 2015 was a watershed moment for sustainability. In Paris, 195 countries came together to sign a landmark climate accord, the Paris Agreement, committing to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 Celsius. For the first time, nations formally pledged long-term strategies, with many setting the foundation for today's net zero goals. It marked a turning point. Climate change was no longer just an environmental issue, but a global governance and economic priority. That same year, the United Nations launched the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 interconnected goals designed to tackle poverty, inequality, climate change, and more by 2030. The SDGs broadened the sustainability agenda, making it clear that progress required balancing environmental protection with social justice and economic opportunity. Businesses responded quickly. Many began aligning their CSR and ESG strategies with the SDGs, using them as a framework to set targets, measure impact, and communicate purpose. By the late 2000s, sustainability was no longer a fringe topic, and it exploded into the center of business, politics, and finance. Millions of young people were marching in the streets through the Fridays for Future climate strikes. A turning point came in 2019 when the Business Roundtable, a coalition of 181 CEOs from America's largest companies, released a landmark statement redefining the purpose of a corporation. For decades, business leaders had followed Milton Friedman's doctrine that corporations existed primarily to maximize shareholder value. But in this declaration, CEOs from companies like Apple, JP Morgan, and Walmart pledged to serve all stakeholders, customers, employees, communities, and the environment, not just shareholders. It was a symbolic but powerful break with traditional corporate dogma and a sign that the era of stakeholder capitalism had arrived. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Almost overnight, supply chains buckled, inequalities deepened, and resilience became the new buzzword. ESG shifted from a nice-to-have to a risk management essential. Companies and investors alike began asking, how do we prepare for shocks? How do we protect workers, communities, and long-term value in a volatile world? At the same time, ESG investing was scaling at record speed. By 2023, ESG assets under management surpassed $35 trillion, more than one-third of all global professionally managed capital. This growth was fueled by both investor demand and regulatory momentum. In Europe, the EU Green Deal set the stage for a climate-neutral continent by 2050. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, passed in 2022, made ESG reporting mandatory for over 50,000 companies across the EU, ensuring that sustainability data would be treated with the same rigor as financial data. Complementing this, the EU taxonomy provided clear definitions of what counts as a sustainable activity, bringing much-needed clarity to a crowded and confusing space. Globally, efforts to harmonize reporting accelerated. In 2021, the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, was created by the IFRS Foundation to consolidate fragmented disclosure systems like SASB and TCFD into one global baseline. Its first standards, released in 2024, set a new benchmark for investor-focused sustainability reporting. In parallel, another frontier emerged: biodiversity and nature-related risks. The Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, began reshaping how companies report on their impacts and dependencies on ecosystems. Just as TCFD had done for climate, TNFD aimed to make biodiversity loss a boardroom issue, reframing deforestation, soil degradation, and water scarcity as material business risks, and together these developments transformed ESG from a scattered set of principles into global financial infrastructure. Looking beyond 2025, several transformative trends are poised to reshape the sustainability landscape, shifting the conversation from prevention alone to resilience and preparedness. Technology and data. The growth of AI-driven ESG analytics will bring real-time monitoring of emissions, supply chains, and labor practices, reducing the space for greenwashing and dramatically increasing accountability. Regeneration as the new paradigm. Perhaps the most profound shift will be moving beyond sustainability, which often means doing less harm, toward regenerative economies that actively restore ecosystems, strengthen communities, and create equity alongside profitability. In short, the future of sustainability will be defined not just by reducing risks, but by designing systems that give back more than they take.